Hello world, this is Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and professor from Johnson County Community College, and the subject of today's short screencast is form tags and how to build a web form. Now, as soon as we get into building a web form, we obviously are going to need a little information and cooperation from our back-end web developer, our back-end programmer, because as soon as I fill out this form and click the submit button, I'm going to want that data to do something for me, either be stored in a back-end database or search a database or place an order. And that's going to require a database and a programmer on the server side to handle that processing. But that's not going to stop us from building our form necessarily. We can build the form interface without knowing all of the technical pieces. But there are a few key areas where we're going to need cooperation with our back-end programmer. When we build our web form as a front-end developer, we're going to put all of our information, all of our elements and attributes inside the opening and closing form tags. And as you can see, there are a lot of new elements and attributes when we start building the form, but they all go inside the opening and closing form tags, even the input boxes that submit and reset our form. In the opening form tag, then, there are two critical attributes. And this is where we're going to need the cooperation of our back-end programmer, because even though as front-end developers, we know we have an action attribute and a method attribute, we're not going to know those values until we work with our back-end programmer. We need the action attribute because that tells the form where the data in the form is going to go as soon as we click the submit button. So obviously, whoever's programming this PHP program, or it could be an ASP program, there are different back-end technologies that can process this data, but PHP and ASP or ASP.NET are two of the most popular technologies for processing form data. Whoever's programming that is going to have to give us that information, the path to that file, and then what the file name is. The second thing we're going to need from our backend programmer is the answer to the method attribute. But fortunately, there are only two options there, get and post. So action tells us where our data is going to go. Method tells us how the data is going to get there. Now, the method attribute is kind of interesting because if we go to the JCCC home site or any home page, we typically see a search box at the top of that web page. And what that really is a little form. And with one input box, one label, and one little submit button that's in the image of the universal search magnifying glass. But if I type anything into that one input box for that form and then click the search button, I can see the criteria that I used for my search in the URL. When you see the criteria that you've typed into the form appended to the URL, you know you're using method get. The other thing that you should be aware of is obviously that's not all that secure because we're passing information directly through the URL. That's why it's a popular method to send data for searches. Even Google uses this on their web page, but it's not a popular method to send data when you're needing to send sensitive or credit card information. Then we would use method post. So the method attribute is a little bit more straightforward because there are only two options, and it's always pretty obvious which option you're going to probably be using. Still, the values for the action and the method are going to be dictated to you by your back-end web programmer. There's one other piece of information that is always dictated by the web programmer, and that is what are you going to name each one of these pieces of data. So for every box that you can type into on a web form, and it might be a small box, an input box like this, it might be a bigger text area, it might be a choice from a drop-down list or option buttons. All of these choices have to have a name. So for everything that you see on this form, there's a lot of code here that identifies all this, but every input box has a name. That name is going to be dictated to you by your back-end web developer, because when you pass them this word Lisa, you will attach this name to that piece of data. So his or her program, whatever it's called, understands that Lisa is the value for the first name field. Friedrichsen is the value for the last name field. And that back-end developer probably has that database already created. So they're not going to want to let you, the front-end developer, rename their fields. They're going to want you to pass them data with the field names they've already established in their back-end database on the server. So in summary, when you develop a form, you're going to have cooperation with your back-end developer. And the three critical pieces of information that they're going to have to give you in order for this form to really work is the value to the action attribute in the opening form tag. That's where the data goes. The method attribute value, that's how the data is sent. Fortunately, we only have two choices there. Get, which is not secure. That's where the information is sent in the URL, and post. And they're also going to have to give you the name attribute value for each piece of data that you send them so that they can identify and process that information successfully. We'll talk more about the rest of these form elements and what you do as a front-end developer in the next screencast. Thank you.